Hello, British literature students. It is now the 6th week of the spring 2017 semester. All right, so I've recorded your grades for the Romanticism exam in the grade book. And that kind of ties in with what I'm going to say next, which is that there's still only 2 students doing postings. Not surprisingly, there were only 2 students that got A's on the Romanticism exam. Coincidence? I think not. So, if you got a C or a D on the Romanticism exam, well, guess what? That's what happens when you don't read the assignments and do your postings throughout the entire week. So, no sympathy for me. Now, here's the other thing I want to say. I'm now starting to get emails from students giving me their excuses for why they've not been doing the postings. Frankly, folks, I don't want to hear them. There is one student that was affected by the tornado on January 22nd. Obviously, I'm going to work with her because she informed me of this, a day or 2 days or something after the tornado, and she, she's struggling a little bit for reasons that are outside of her control. I'll work with her. But unless you can demonstrate to me that you've been laid up in a coma for this entire semester, I'm not hearing your excuses. I'm not even listening to them. You need to get those postings done. And oh, by the way, those first 2 postings are now more than 3 weeks late, so they get automatic Fs. That's the way it works in this class. I told you that in the beginning of the semester. It's written out in my syllabus. I have no sympathy for you. So, do the postings, get them done on time, and you will do well in this class, just like the 2 students who did the A's on the Romanticism exam. If you don't do that, well, if you fail this class at the end of the semester, read my extra credit policy. It says there will be no extra credit for students who have not been doing their work. And, you get the grade you earn. This is a meritocracy, so that's the grade you get. All right, this week we are starting off with Victorianism. You need to go through and read the introduction to the Victorianism in the E, which is this book right here. So we are no longer in the book with a purple cover. Now we're in this book right here. And we will... So read that introduction to the Victorian period, and then read, which is, of course is pages 1017 through 43. Now that's going to be a long introduction, but you don't have to do a posting on it. But you still need to read it because it helps to understand the context of Queen Victoria's reign. And really, Victorianism starts about 5 years or so before her reign, runs all the way through to about 13 or 14 years after her death when World War I starts. So that's a very long period. Up until Queen Elizabeth II surpassed her maybe it's been 2 years ago now, 1 or 2 years ago, Victoria had been the longest reigning monarch in British history. And she's still second now only to Queen Elizabeth, whose reign continues. So every day that she lives, she adds another day to that record. All right, so get yourself familiar with the Victorian period because we are going to study those issues like the woman issue and especially in the Industrial Revolution as we move forward. And then we got Alfred Lord Tennyson. Alfred Lord Tennyson, when you think of Victorian poetry, you think of Alfred Lord Tennyson. He is representative of that. He was Poet Laureate of England, which is a big deal. Means you're like the head poet and you set the standards by which all poetry will be judged. He was Poet Laureate in England for many, many years. He's probably most well known for his poem In Memoriam, but that's a very long, very complicated poem. I'm not going to make you read that. In Memoriam, though, is where the very famous phrase, it is better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all, comes from. It comes from In Memoriam. But Tennyson, the 2 poems I've chosen for you today, The Lady of Shalott and Ulysses, are variations on already existing British legends. Or actually, not just British legends, but Greek mythology legends as well. So, for Lady of Shalott, that plays on the King Arthur legend. And you're going to see that Sir Lancelot is going to be a character in The Lady of Shalott. The Lady of Shalott is based upon this lady who was imprisoned within a castle on an island called Shalott in the middle of the river that leads down to Camelot. And as long as she stays in there, she will live and be young and happy forever. But she has to experience life. She has to live. So she's going to go out of the castle, and it will cost her her life. She will literally die. But not only is that a play on the King Arthur legend, but there's also a couple of other themes that play out in Lady of Shalott. One is art. She weaves tapestries all day. And so art, even though it reflects life, isn't really life, if you can think of it that way. And so this poem plays on that, how the stories she weaves into the tapestry are just that, stories. And then the other role it plays is the loss of innocence. As long as she stays in that castle, she's protected from the outside world. But once she ventures out into the outside world and into the dangers that the outside world have, then she loses her innocence and she becomes more experienced, and the end result, of course, as those of you that read the Bible know, is death. So, that's Lady of Shalott. And then Ulysses. Ulysses is a sequel to the Odyssey. The Odyssey was a poem written by Homer, or supposedly written by a man named Homer in ancient Greece. It's the story of, or actually it's based upon the Odyssey. The Odyssey is the poem written by Homer. And it's the story of Ulysses' return from Troy after the Greeks defeated Troy. And if you know that story, it was done with a Trojan horse. So after they tore down the walls of Troy and destroyed Troy and got Helen back to her husband, Ulysses takes a 20-year journey to get home. This was a journey that took the rest of the Greeks about a year or less. But, it takes Ulysses 20 years. And, of course, he goes on many adventures. The poem that you're reading for Alfred Lord Tennyson, titled Ulysses, is a sequel to that. When Ulysses returns to his island of Ithaca, his son has been ruling the island in his absence, and his wife is now 30 years older because he spent 10 years fighting in the war, and then, of course, 20 years waiting for him. She was very faithful to him. She turned down all of the marriage proposals on the off chance that her husband might still be alive. And, of course, he was. So he gets back, he sees all these men eating his food and living on his land and destroying his property and hitting on his wife, so he kills them all. So all the rivals are now dead. Well, what we're going to see in our poem is that this is an old Ulysses who has been home for a while and he's bored. He's been on all these grand adventures. He has fought the Cyclops. He has survived Circe and her turning men into pigs island. He has gotten past the Hydra and the whirlpool on the other side of the Hydra. So he has been through wars and adventures, and now he's at home acting as a judge, basically sitting on a throne while people bring their problems to him and whine and cry, and he's thinking, this is boring, I got to get back out there. So this poem, Ulysses, is about his decision to leave the island with his son Telemachus and to go off on one last grand adventure, which will probably kill him, but he'd rather die that way than die an old man on his island. So those are the two poems by Tennyson, and your discussion postings will play on either the continuation of old stories or on loss of innocence for the Lady of Shalott. Okay, so if you have any questions, email me. Remember, any posting now that is for weeks 2 or 3 are now an automatic F because they're more than 3 weeks late, unless I have given you permission already for whatever reason to go ahead and turn them in late, which there's only one student that I can say that about. And for the 2 students that are keeping up and doing well, keep up the good work. And if you have any questions, contact me through email, by telephone, or in my office during my office hours.